Okay, welcome everyone to the second session um, of the Red Lac Cafe Virtual Congress. This session will be on impact investment, the private sector, and conservation. So welcome, bonjour, bienvenue to everyone joining across the Americas, Africa, and the rest of the world. It's great to have such a diverse and interesting group of people with so many different perspectives being shared. In today's session, or in this session, we'll have the launch of FINMA, presented by Zdenka Piskulic, the Executive Director of Forever Costa Rica Association and the President of Redlac. And we'll have Gabriela Anaya, the Senior Advisor of the Mexico Program at the David and Lucille Packard Foundation. This will be followed by a panel discussion on this topic of impact investment, private sector and conservation, moderated by Anton Williams, the Executive Director of Profonampe, Peru. As you already know, we have the chat and Q&A function, so please do make use of those during this section. And in fact, feel free to go ahead in the chat. Make sure you select all participants and attendees so everyone can see your message and share a hello from wherever you're joining in the world and introduce yourself. As we're going through the session, if you do have questions, make sure you put them in the Q&A box, not in the comments. And you, as a participant, will be able to comment on other people's questions. And so we also encourage our speakers to do that as we're going through. We're probably going to have so many questions, we might not be able to answer them all. So feel free to add comments written in case we don't have time to, and also upvote your favorite questions to make sure they will be prioritized. We also have interpretation provided into French and Spanish, so you can click the globe option at the bottom of your screen, select interpretation into French and Spanish. And just a reminder that this session will be recorded and also live streamed onto Facebook. And so with that, I'd like to introduce the first speaker again. Zdenka, over to you.
Thank you very much, James, and welcome to all of you who are just joining us, and welcome back to all of you who have participated in our first session this morning. What we will be hearing about in this next session is also a continuation of some of the challenges that were posed during the first session and some of the solutions that we have been working on to address these challenges. And precisely what we are about to launch right now is a solution that we have been working on as Redlac members and envisioning to protect our oceans. So on behalf of Redlac, I am proud to announce the launch of FINMAR, the Marine Conservation Finance Coalition for Latin America and the Caribbean. For the past 20 years, Redlac funds have been developing conservation finance solutions. Many of the innovative tools that these funds have developed and applied, such as payments for environmental services, debt for nature swaps, compensation mechanisms, have all benefited terrestrial protected areas. And they're currently more diverse and more sophisticated than those that we are using for the ocean. Currently, however, 80% of the Redlac funds have very strong marine conservation programs and are all actively contributing to help their countries meet these new global goals. Therefore, the time has come for Redlac to build its legacy in developing cutting-edge conservation finance tools to help protect our oceans. Through FINMAR, through this new coalition of conservation trust funds, we plan to work jointly to support the achievement of the post-2020 goals in the region by creating innovative finance solutions for marine conservation. Through FINMAR, we will seek a strategic and a holistic approach to support blue finance by generating, innovating, aligning, and accounting for financial capital to achieve sustained ocean health and governance. 17 conservation trust funds from the region, including 3 regional marine funds representing 20 countries, are the founders of FINMAR, and they will work together to jointly tackle and overcome the problems that hinder blue economy development in the region. The founding members of FINMAR are PACT Belize, Fumbio Brazil, Fondo Patrimonio Natural Colombia, Fondo Acción Colombia, Forever Costa Rica, FIAES El Salvador, Fondo para el Manejo de Áreas Protegidas Honduras, Fondo Mexicano México, Fundación Natura Panamá, Profonampe Perú, MAR Fund from the Mesoamerican Reef, the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, Fondo Marena from Dominican Republic, FIAS in Ecuador, Sur Futuro in Dominican Republic, St. Lucia National Conservation Trust Fund, and the Pacifico Regional Fund representing the Eastern Tropical Pacific. Through FINMAR, all of these funds will work together as REDLAC members to encourage funds to explore innovative financial mechanisms. This can be achieved by doing what we know best how to do as a network: encouraging knowledge sharing, building collaborative platforms, promoting capacity building, and fostering new ideas through the creation of a Blue Lab. REDLAC's Blue Agenda will ensure that the new ambitious ocean agenda can be met creatively and effectively. Let us now watch a small video describing this new REDLAC initiative.
Oceans produce 70% of the oxygen we inhale, making them vital for global survival. Keeping marine ecosystems healthy is crucial for global biodiversity, cultural and social well-being, and the economies that depend on its precious resources. Yet the damage done to oceans over the decades increasingly threatens their survival. Environmental funds and other organizations have dedicated their effort over the years to protect marine environments. But in this cause, there is so much more we can do together. We still struggle with a lack of standards and metrics, few investment pipelines, underfinancing for ocean investments, reduced public funding. Our oceans are in a crucial moment. As world leaders set more ambitious goals for marine conservation, environmental funds are uniquely poised to help develop creative ideas, meet these unique challenges, and ensure sustainable ocean finance. The only thing missing to kickstart the change we need is a coordinated effort to tackle today's obstacles and scale our current actions to reach to sustainable solutions. REDLAC aims to achieve the post-2020 goals in the region by creating innovative finance solutions. This is why we are launching FINMAR. FINMAR is a REDLAC initiative that seeks to bridge the divide between the sectors of economics and finance with ocean science. With a strategic and holistic approach to support blue finance by generating, innovating, aligning, and accounting for financial capital to achieve sustained ocean health and governance. FINMAR has 4 different areas of work: collaboration platforms to facilitate dialogue and networking, mentorship to replicate best practices, Blue Lab to implement finance solutions, and capacity building to scale talent and ideas. We need to protect our oceans today with a vision that ensures a better tomorrow. Join us and let's work together to innovate, collaborate, mobilize funds, improve livelihoods, and build a better blue economy.
Thank you for that excellent video. We'll now hand over to Gabriela Anaya, the Mexico Program Advisor for Collective Impact for Mexican Fisheries and Agriculture at the David and Lucille Packard Foundation. Thank you, Gabriela.
Thank you, James. Good morning, bonjour, buenos días a todos. Thank you for inviting me to be part of the launch of FINMAR. And let me start by saying something very personal. While I live in Mexico City, you cannot see it, but it's right there. I'm not wearing a swimming suit, and I do not own a boat. I am an ocean person, 100% an ocean person. I have worked on marine conservation and sustainability for almost 30 years now. And after all of this time, I'm more convinced than ever on the importance of accelerating our efforts to advance marine conservation, to make sustainability more than a word for the illuminated, to transcend our sectorial differences, and find our way into mainstreaming our good intentions for the oceans. I think we're living what I truly hope are exciting times for the sea. The world is in the process of realizing that the ocean is one of the big economic frontiers. The ocean's economy is valued at around $3 trillion per year, which makes it the world's 7th largest economy based on GDP. And of course, when you hear these numbers, they are very appealing. But history has shown us that sexy economic values do not necessarily lead to sustainability, equity, and well-being. If we want history to reflect better the environmental and social outcomes that we really need, we have to actively advocate for a sustainable blue economy and prevent the ocean from being treated as the next new frontier, yes, but for conventional capitalism, since we have already exploited all previous ones. I am an optimist, but I am an informed optimist, and I believe that a blue economy is possible. And we have in front of all of us good news and bad news. The good news is that the roadmap is rather clear. We have to work on economic growth, conservation and sustainable use of the ocean, inclusive social development, science and innovation, and sound ocean governance. We know what the task is here. The bad news is that we are most definitely not there yet. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 14 tasks us to conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will establish 20 new targets to promote transformational changes in all sectors by 2030. If we are to have any hope achieving Goal 14 and the post-2020 targets, then we must finally, I've waited 30 years to say this, to set our eyes and collective intelligence towards the ocean. And it doesn't mean just putting on goggles and looking at the ocean. It means many things. It means acknowledging that the ocean might be full of water, but quite frankly, I think it's thirsty for our actions. It means cultivating marine citizenship and marine literacy. It means bringing sustainability into all ocean-based industries boardrooms, from shipping, fisheries, tourism, to aquaculture, energy, and biotechnology. It means cooperating, but it not just collaborating among people we like, among institutions who are like-minded, but also with those who are different, and which sometimes we have even think about them as contraries to our interest. And it also means funding, thinking about money in a smart way, and funding adequately in terms of the size, duration, and diversity of revenue. It really amazes me because the ocean covers 71% of the Earth, but over the past 10 years, it has received less than 1% of all philanthropic funding and remains the least funded of all the Sustainable Development Goals, 1%. Few individuals and programs worldwide specialize in blue finance and integrate its lines of thinking. I think it's safe to say, and this is the right place for saying it, that we need smart, diverse, strategic, holistic, collaborative, and culturally sensitive blue finance and funding. We need it. And we need funders who understand not just money, which is very important, but who are willing to embrace the marine environment's complexity. We need funders who know that we cannot merely copy-paste the lessons learned in the land into the marine realm, where property rights are limited and where common pool resources need continued access. We have to innovate and learn with our attention and minds oriented towards the sea. And because we need that so much, I really welcome and congratulate the effort of REDLAC to summon forces to aggregate efforts, to scale impact, and convene some of the most important organizations that are working on the blue economy to learn from each other and to advance this cause. As the ocean person that I claim to be, and on behalf of the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, I thank you and congratulate the 17 founding members of FINMOR who have decided to jointly tackle this challenge. Together, and it's more than words, together I really think that you can make the whole more significant than the sum of the parts, and I wish you all of the success. Thank you.
Thank you both, Zdenka and Gabriela, for those interventions. And we will now move on to the second half of this session, which will be a panel on the wider conversation of investment and private sector involvement. And I'll introduce the moderator for that panel, the Executive Director of Profonampe, Anton Willems. So over to you, Anton, to lead that session, and thank you.
Thank you, James, and good morning to everyone. Maybe good afternoon to our friends and colleagues in Africa and in other regions. Buenos días a todos y todas. Un gusto estar con ustedes acá en REDLAC. It's a great pleasure to share with all of you the opportunity to talk about impact investment, the private sector, and conservation. As most of you know, we currently are in a situation where most environmental scientists say that we are reaching a no-return point regarding the impact of human behavior on our biodiversity and the effects on climate change. Therefore, a common sense of urgency and work together is required. From the point of view of the Latin American and Caribbean environmental funds, we think it's time to come together and work on a common agenda. A common agenda that involves bridging the financial gap that conservation of biodiversity requires. The numbers are really big, really big. And so it's an illusion to think that it will be solved only with traditional funding. We need to bring to the table new partners. Reaching out to these new partners is not an easy task, as we heard on the previous panel in the morning. There are some issues to be solved before. On one corner, we must convince our governments to reallocate to a new green growth agenda the limited resources that they already invest in development. This means increasing advocacy towards public servants and the citizens in general to assure that their will is adopted. So we need to convince to have new rules. And on the other corner, we must make sure that the private sector join us and work with this tremendous task. The economic case for investing in conservation of our biodiversity is clear. So it's not a matter of how much, it's more a matter of when for most of them. Helping the private sector to join this common effort requires a set of tools that allows them to make it faster to adopt the agenda. In REDLAC, we have implemented a community of practice that will help to share these efforts made by our different partners and provide a common platform to allow the private sector to join us. In order to understand much better how we can convene the private sector to allocate resources and capacities to this effort, we have a very experimented group of speakers who will share with us their experience and lessons learned. And therefore, I will introduce the three speakers that will accompany me in this session. First of all, Mrs. Brett Stevenson. She is the lead ESG advisor at Okabongo Capital Partners. Then we will also have Nicolas Pascal. He is the director of Blue Finance. And finally, a friend of all us in REDLAC, Alberto Saavedra, the president of the board of the Fondo Mexicano para la Conservación Natural. So please, Mrs. Brett, I invite you to the floor and make your first presentation.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Really appreciate it. I've been asked to share our experiences with impact investing in Africa, and I speak on the behalf of a strategic partnership between the African Wildlife Foundation and a specialist investment group called Okavango Capital Partners. We have been involved in impact investing in Africa and using business as a tool for conservation since 1999. And this is because it resonates very deeply with our fundamental philosophy, which is wildlife and wildlands will survive if the land is contiguous and healthy, and economic development is one of the biggest drivers that causes degradation of these landscapes. And so rather than trying to push off the freight train of economic development that's coming and saying that we're in opposition to it, we try and work with the drivers of economic development and find a balanced path. So the fundamental philosophy behind our work is that unsustainable behavior is the driver of ecosystem degradation, and that will, if we stop that, then we can prevent species loss. We see business as a tool that complements the nonprofit kind of toolkit for achieving behavior change, and it offers three things that are really important. The first one is it creates economic incentives to drive behavior change, and so money shapes behavior, we all know that. But the second piece is that it can do that in a very sustainable way. If a business is successful, it can do that in perpetuity. And lastly, using market forces, it can scale way beyond what any kind of a nonprofit program can accomplish. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our theory of change, and then the progression of models that we've done in the market, and then a couple learnings to just share our experiences. So the first piece, as an investor, we offer three things. We give capital, we give special advice and expertise on the conservation front, as well as the commercial front. And we provide access to data that allows companies to make better decisions around conservation. And the result is what we call conservation businesses. And that is companies that are in nature-linked sectors, employing strategies that encourage more sustainable behavior. So these strategies involve a series of mechanisms, trying to incentivize new behavior, diverting behavior, mitigating behavior for a series of stakeholders that are involved in activities that cause damage to landscapes. And at the end of the day, the outcome of that is we're trying to enhance positive behaviors and reduce negative behaviors. So positive behaviors could be scaled consumption of sustainable products that displace unsustainable products. So using renewable energy instead of charcoal, for example. Another example of a negative behavior would be agricultural sprawl. So we do a lot of work trying to prevent land conversion for agricultural purposes and helping people get more out of their existing land. And the ultimate impact we're looking for includes obviously conservation outcomes and protecting species and ecosystem services and ecosystems that house them, but also climate mitigation and climate resilience that comes from that conservation, and poverty alleviation that also comes through the work that we do with companies. And then the last piece on the commercial front is building sustainable markets that increase the amount of jobs and the proportion to GDP that's coming from business activity that uses natural resources sustainably. So I'll talk about the 3 phases of the work we've gone through. We started in the 2000s with seeding tourism lodges. So tourism provides 80% of the funding for protected areas in Africa, and so it's an incredibly important sector. It's also incredibly important for creating ownership amongst local communities to engage them in the process of protecting wildlife. So during the 2000s, we helped to seed 14 different companies across Africa, primarily in East Africa. And the model we used was we would raise grant capital, we would build assets and grant them over to the community. And then we would pair the community with a world-class tourism operator and then create a revenue sharing model where the community, as long as that company was running, would gain economic revenue from that. And then we worked with the communities to create governance structures so that they could make good decisions about how to allocate that money. Today, all of those companies are running on TripAdvisor. The average rating is 4.9 stars. So they are very successful companies. One of them is actually was rated in the top 20 of Condé Nast global destinations. So we're very excited about how successful that model was. And these companies in turn have generated millions of dollars for communities. The next stage we went into, though, was using investment capital, because we just found that there was a lot of restrictions on using grant capital to support business. And so we raised a $7 million fund focused on debt financing for early stage companies. And what we're really looking to do is find the innovation points where commercial businesses can deliver conservation outcomes. And we did it in tourism, and we also moved into the agriculture space. So examples of companies in this portfolio include Asalia, which is a fast-growing tourism company that is moving into underdeveloped landscapes and protected areas that are less well-known in the area, and they generate $4 million a year for park management. Comaco works with 180,000 farmers, 50% of which are women, and they engage them in conservation farming practices to improve ecosystem health and protect wildlife. Old Pejida is a ranching tourism combined model that lets wildlife and livestock live in harmony, reducing human wildlife conflict. They have 900 employees, and they are the largest rhino conservancy in East Africa. And then lastly, we have African Forest Lodges, which is an adventure center that targets middle-class Africans to engage them in inspirational experiences so that they can become advocates for nature. It also protects a key area of forest that would be in danger from logging and natural resource extraction. So we invested in 9 companies in total. These are 4 of them. But what we realized as we were doing this, first of all, was that debt has its limitations, just as grant capital did. And we wanted to move into more flexible instruments like private equity and mezzanine structures. But the biggest insight was that we needed to scale more. These were small early stage companies that were more pure conservation. They were built to deliver conservation outcomes. Whereas if you look at the landscapes that we're looking in, there's companies that are in positions of power with respect to what's going to happen in wildlands over the next 20 years. And how do we work with those companies to make sure that they're basically on the right side of history when you get to the other side? And so what we do is we take a data-driven approach to look at where are the most important landscapes in our 5 priority countries, which are mostly in East Africa, and then which companies in nature-linked sectors are operating in those landscapes, and how can we work with those companies to develop strategies that allow them to create solutions that benefit nature. So a few examples here in this portfolio or pipeline are sustainable fisheries. So looking at how do we take the rising middle class that's going to be consuming more and more protein, how do we create sustainable scaled fisheries that switches them from beef over to fish, because beef, as I'm sure many of you know, can be very environmentally destructive. A tree farming company that scales through smallholder land, how do we help them decide which species to plant and where in order to increase climate resilience and mitigation, as well as ecosystem health? An irrigation company who's scaling rapidly across landscapes, how do we help them do so with knowledge about how they're affecting water tables in different areas? And then tourism, we're taking the next stage of evolution, trying to consolidate the industry into larger companies so that we don't have such small fragmented companies delivering fragmented impact, essentially. How do we create platforms that create significantly more revenue for conservation, as well as deliver much more widespread benefits? So 2 quick learnings that we've had out of this, the kind of evolution in these 3 acts. First is around impact measurement and managing impact. We basically, historically, have had 2 tools. There's conservation covenants, which look at the strategic inputs companies can do to deliver conservation outcomes. And we create agreements as part of our investment, legal investment documents that bind our companies to making progress across certain indicators. And we review those every year and track the improvements. We also look at KPIs across key themes and measure best we can using traditional tools like surveys and company financials and all our reporting and that sort of thing. But what we're finding is that those one of the biggest learnings is that those aren't sufficient. Basically, they're not sufficient to help us really drive these companies towards good decision making, and they're not enough for us to be able to really validate and improve upon our theories of change with the companies. So what we're working on now is something called conservation business intelligence, which essentially is taking emerging technology and spatial analytics and Earth observation like satellites and sensors and creating highly localized data that we can put into spatial platforms that allow us to see data in space and time. And we can collect data on things like soil health and deforestation and land use, and we can pair that data with the interventions that companies are doing so that they can directly see, if I trained farmers over here, that resulted in this change in soil health, and that was much better than these farmers over here. So we're really excited about this initiative and how it can essentially transform how we design, manage, and communicate conservation interventions. And the second learning that has been pretty big for us is that the universe of conservation funders is obviously too small to scale to the level of need. And so over the last 4 years, we've really been looking at how do we position conservation work in the interests of others. And so we've been we've opened up the way that we message what we do to make it interesting to investors who care about poverty, investors who care about climate. Obviously, climate finance is a big piece, and then the commercial pool of investors. If we can generate commercial returns, then we can bring in commercial investors. There's 3 barriers that we've learned that we need to overcome. The first is that there's a very strong bias against conservation companies. People think that they're too small, they don't generate commercial returns. And so very difficult to get their heads around that. The second piece is education. They don't immediately see the linkages between conservation and climate, conservation and poverty. And you have to do a lot of education to help them understand how conservation work can help them achieve their goals in a way that they hadn't thought of. And then the last piece is fit. Investors tend to have very rigid boundaries in their strategy. And even if they are, say, investing in climate and they have a framework that invests in climate, the way they set it up makes it sometimes very difficult because conservation doesn't naturally fit into the boundaries that they've put. So those are 3 things that we basically need to overcome to start bringing more money into the industry, and I'm working really hard with investors to achieve. So that's basically what I wanted to share, and I look forward to any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you so much, Brett. It looks really impressive, the work you are doing and the way you are approaching these topics. And definitely there are a lot of lessons for all of us. Now I will go over to Nicolas Pascal. Nicolas is the director of Blue Finance, and his organization, I think Nicolas will tell us, but has a lot of experience with marine protected areas. So Nicolas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anton. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Buenos dias et bonjour. I think it's a great panel, and going after Okavango is quite a big challenge. These guys are really good. Okay, so recognize it. So what I will present here is a much more modest approach, still with great potential regarding upscaling. So what is doing Blue Finance? Blue Finance is a social enterprise, NGO, what we develop is solutions, blended finance solutions for marine protected areas specifically. So we specialized on the ocean side, on the coastal area. We are in proof of concept and upscaling this proof of concept. So basically, our main achievements today have been 2 marine protected areas under active management. One is one of the largest MPA in the Caribbean, in the Dominican Republic, and another one is in the Philippines, south of Manila. And both of them are progressing towards financial sustainability. This is the final aim of Blue Finance. You can put a lot of words: impact investment, blended finance, commercial revenue, entrepreneurship, but really the final aim of what we're looking for is to make the MPAs financially sustainable. So how do we get there? And obviously with clear impacts on the people and the environment, which is part of the approach. So to get there, and we try to bring also a private sector into it, this is our approach. So we work with existing MPAs under some kind of co-management agreement. We are really looking for MPAs that has an agreement with government, or where Blue Finance can help local partners develop this kind of public and private partnership or collaborative management with government to get a lease for the day-to-day management of the MPA. That's a starting block. If we want to bring some kind of blended finance, development banks, or even commercial investors, we need a clear management structure, and it's much harder if it is under government structure. So we try to deal and focusing on this kind of collaborative management. That doesn't mean that government doesn't have a role. The government has a very clear role, a very strong role into regulation, into enforcement, into spatial planning, and all the rest of the general regulations of a government. What we're asking is a delegation of a day-to-day management or part of it. The second aspect is we're going to focus on MPAs that has a potential to develop their own revenues, okay? So this is not something new. I think we've been looking for guides in conservations have been published for the last 20 years. We have a list of different instruments that can be implemented. What we do here is through Blue Finance and working with the local partners and experts in this specific marine conservation finance is develop a tangible, a smart business plan with the MPA. Okay, so this can be based on different revenue models, and I will be back to this. Once we have these 2 first elements together, we have something that can be presented towards different donors. So not only philanthropic, but also something more towards development banks, catalytic funding, and in some cases towards commercial investors. Because here, if we have a good revenue model, maybe there will be a small part of it that can revert to investors as a repayment of a debt or a loan. Okay, so that's part of a blended finance. I repeat, when we talk about blended finance, we try to introduce several elements, going from grants that most of the people on this webinar are aware of, coming from other kind of conservation trust fund doing some endowments, but we're also bringing new money onto it. We try to unlock private capital, okay? And to unlock this private capital, we need to provide some tangible revenue models to be able to pay back. So I repeat again, we have to pay back part of it, okay? So we have to put on the table the right partners that are not too in a hurry and not too aggressive, and that understand the business model of what is it to run an MPA and how does it work for conservation. Nothing happens in 3 years. So be patient and be kind with nature. So that's the speech. What we try to bring around the table is this kind of investors. I think one of the key points is obviously where do we start from? The tangible revenues for MPAs. So we have been developing in these sites and in other sites that we have work in progress. Basically, we have usual one based on user fees. That can be compulsory user fees, but can be also voluntary contributions, where you develop a whole marketing and branding campaign for the marine sanctuary with visitors and residents, and you create some virtual reality products. You can be very creative if you have a proper staff and proper time and proper resources to create contributions from the visitors in the country or from the residents in the country. We can create also some digital or very innovative visitor center that will create some new attractions. think that divers, obviously I'm a free diver. I'm spending all my time in the water, but if you go and ask in any country in the Caribbean, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia, it's very common. Over 10 visitors, you will have one diver, and maybe another one that will make a tour in a catamaran or go into the sea. So what happens with the rest of these 8 other visitors? Basically, they're very interested in what is happening underwater, but they don't want to get wet. So what we do is to create this kind of new solutions using virtual reality, 360 videos, high-tech visitor centers, so requiring quite a big investment to bring all these people not diving to discover the underwater world. So basically, we improve the experience of these visitors. We can also create some underwater attractions. We can create more dive sites and more dive attractions with wakes or with underwater trails. We can be even more creative. We can create underwater art show. So all of these things create some activities around the MPS that will generate more revenues. Obviously, always linked to tourism for these free instruments. So given this context, we know tourism is resilient, but we learned our lesson. We have to diversify revenues. So that's why we're exploring other kind of revenue strategies and revenue sharing, developing sustainable fisheries in some cases, or implementing blue carbon credits. We are obviously in the first stage, mainly in Philippines, or exploring innovative mechanism like payment for ecosystem services for the coastal protection or beach protection provided by coral reef. Okay, so obviously I can explain on this, but it will require a lot of time. What is being done with these revenues is obviously a very clear and traditional mandate of MPA. So I will not expand on this. This is the classic activities of a marine protected area and the day-to-day management. The impacts have to be very clearly defined, very clearly monitored. So that's why the KPIs are very defined from the very beginning. We try to focus on coral reef, people, coastal fishers mainly, and other livelihood of critical communities living around the MPA. And one of the other impact, given this webinar, is also to unlock private capital. So in our 2 projects, we were able to unlock more than $3 million US from private capital, but otherwise would never have come into MPA. So you will tell me, okay, but this is very specific to some MPAs and very reduced. And I will say, yes, this is not a silver bullet. We're not going to solve the 20,000 MPAs we have worldwide with this kind of blended finance solution or bringing impact investors. No, this is not going to work. Here we are focusing on a small front, maybe 5 to 10% of these MPAs, but today have the capacities to produce tangible revenues with obviously some entrepreneurship skills, with obviously the proper staff dedicated to this. And I don't know any MPA in the world that have staff which has free time or extra time, and the director of an MPA has so many things to deal with. So to put more burden on them is not feasible. So what we have to do here is really work as a development company to do some kind of project management office with the MPAs, and we will create this partnership. We will make this happen to create these revenues for these MPAs that have been identified on the initial way. So today, we think this is a scalable solution. For governments, it's a turnkey solution that allows them, maybe over the 20 MPAs, to have 1 or 2 financially sustainable, where they don't have to put any resources, so they can dedicate their scarce resources to the other MPAs. So that's a good news for governments. And for these MPAs, it's totally financially sustainable, not depending on any political agenda. So we think it's a good solution for government also. I repeat, this is not for all MPAs, for some of them. Today, we have a pipeline of more than 12 projects that we are developing in Caribbean, Southeast Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And we hope that we will be more and more and more baby Blue Finance or baby PPPs products. And very briefly, so Blue Finance, I think it's interesting to share this multidisciplinary approach. When you speak about investment to a conservationist, or you speak a marine conservation or coral reef to investment banker, you need a lot of background, a lot of passions, a lot of communication. So we try to bring on the team people with a little touch of everything, even if they specialize in the field, but at least to understand and have this passions of communicating to everyone. And most of the cases it has been working. Obviously, we have more than 300 different presentations for the same topic, but that's part of the when you create a new approach. Obviously, you have to communicate and communicate and communicate until it becomes something proof of concept. And this is the kind of partners that we try to sit around the table. So usual partners for marine conservation and partners specific for blended finance. So all of this, we try to merge it and we bring into the MPAs to make it financially sustainable. I repeat, Blue Finance, we don't do the day-to-day management. This is the local NGOs, the local partners. What we try to do is to create this partnership to make them financially sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicolas. Really exciting to hear how different approaches are used to conserve something that most of us don't know. For instance, here in Peru, we are currently on course of having a new MPA, and it will be far abroad to shore. So I think we have a lot of challenges facing the next years in Peru. Our next speaker is Alberto Saavedra. Alberto Saavedra is the president of the board of the Fundación Mexicana para la Conservación de la Naturaleza, and he has a lot of experience dealing with the private sector and also how to combine their efforts to the conservation of biodiversity. Please, Alberto, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Anton. Good morning, buenos días, bonjour, bon dia. It's really a pleasure and a privilege, and I want to begin by saying thank you for your very kind invitation to share this wonderful red cafe with such distinguished panelists. I convey a message from Fondo Mexicano that we want to share with all of our friends who are listening today. And this is on where we are standing right now. It's the beginning of this little message. We're in the middle of a pandemic that it's causing incredible consequences in the world, not only on the health side, but also on the economy and financial availability of resources with which we work. So the question is, how is that we will be over after this process? And remember, the pandemic is caused by a virus. It's a biological process. Well, we in Fondo Mexicano, we do have hope. We do believe that we will end being more fraternity with a more green and circular economy. We will be more conscious about sustainability. We will begin to understand that we are only one kind, one species in the planet, and that we should take care of ourselves if we want to survive as a being in this planet. So, to be wise, to have an effect on our investments, to be conscious on how we invest and the impact that we can cause, well, we need to begin to think about these elements. We need to be green. We need to be sustainable. We need to be conscious. It's not a nice thing to do. Today, it's a must in all levels of organizations, in all kinds of activities. I personally live in a double-fold position that I want to share with you. On one side, those who make decisions of investment. You have investors which are both retail and institutional ones. We need to work with them. Second kind are the governments and the multilaterals, are important players and will continue to be very important players in these decisions. And third is our group of people, civil, non-governmental organizations. We need to develop in all these levels a matter of consciousness on the famous ESG. And what I experience from institutional investors is the need always to look at these three elements. Is the investment environmentally wise? Is the investment socially sound? Is the entity an entity with good governance? All these elements have to be taken care of every time we make a decision. And remember, the great power of individual decisions could make a huge difference in the world. Those, on the other side, who receive investments shall align also their operation and their decisions, their DNA, also to these values. It doesn't matter the size. We have to invite the little and the medium-sized organizations to begin to live this dream. Financial institutions, and some of us NGOs are financial, have a transcendent, important responsibility on this task. We should only think on one element. We need to direct our investments to have an impact, and we have to educate. Education is a key word, so that everybody has the knowledge and the sharing of experience of these important elements. I have a couple of advice to give to you in this moment. One is, be courageous. Say no to any form of fear. Say no to any kind of a nationalism. We are only one kind. We are only one people. The second advice that Fondo wants to share with you is to be happy. You who work in conservancy are the future of the people. We are diverse, but we are enthusiasts. We love life. Let's think that in all and each of our decisions, we are impacting the life of this beautiful blue planet. I hope that these meetings organized by REDLAC shall be vitamins on your everyday investment decisions. I also want to recall you that your first resource to make investments with is your time. Direct always your will to invest wisely your time. And afterwards, we can discuss how we'll direct our financial resources. In Fondo Mexicano, we are directing our investments with a scientific, objective criteria. Now that there are so many populisms around the world, and that we see such attacks on knowledge and science, shall not be disappointed. I invite each one of you to defend knowledge and science. Please be faithful to your mission, your vision, and your values above all. I want finally to thank each one of you for giving me a little piece of your transcendental and divine nature in hearing me this morning or this evening in these 8 minutes in which I finally want to say the heart of Fondo Mexicano, who is struggling with many situations, is in friendship and love with each one of your works and each one of your struggles. Thank you so much, Anton.
Thank you, Alberto, for your words and also share the inspiration of Fondo Mexicano to bring different lessons we have learned over the time. So now I invite the people to put your questions in the Q&A system, and we will ask the different speakers to go over some of the questions. But first of all, I would like to ask to Brett who presented us their experience in Africa. No, one question that some of the environmental trust funds are facing in these times is how to make the case for impact investment and bring private investors to the board. So I would like you to ask, how can we convince private investors that the long-term returns in their investments is better for the sustainability, and it's also a good business model? I don't know if you can please share your thoughts for a couple of minutes about that.
Sure, yeah, I can speak a little bit about our experiences. So a couple things we've done, and then I can talk about kind of what the results been. One, I mentioned that we actually changed a lot of conservation organizations focused on what, I was talking about being like the pure conservation opportunities that don't necessarily scale and aren't necessarily always as commercial as what investors are looking for. And so one thing that we've been doing is broadening our thinking again to these companies that are commercial and that other investors are working in, but we're bringing a new lens to help them think about conservation and integrate it. And what we're finding is that a lot of these companies are actually really interested in increasing their capacity in this area because they can see what impact they'll have if they don't go in this direction. And a lot of companies and investors really care now about, to your point, about the climate impacts. It's becoming more and more top of mind that they need to be paying attention. We spend a lot of time on education, as I mentioned. We just, people don't necessarily come from a background where they connect the dots and understand why it's important. So kind of once we can get in the door and have that initial conversation, we spend a lot of time explaining how everything comes together and trying to, I would say 80% of my job is strategic communications, trying to spin the Rubicon and appeal to the interests of a person and connect to what their interests are and how it backtracks into conservation. So that's what we've done, and like I was mentioned, we've had some success, but it's a slow battle. The funding for impact investing for us, at least as a smaller kind of private equity fund, is largely going to come from governments at the start, and that's how we are piloting and kind of getting these new ideas off the ground, like through the development finance institutions. But our expectation is to bring as the commercial investors in as rapidly as possible so that we can scale, and that's going to be done through demonstrating commercial returns. That's really what's going to turn their heads and make them interested. But we have been very happy with the response from companies and their interest in bringing this type of expertise to the table.
Thank you. I think education is a main topic, and that comes from all of your speeches and also from the experience from the different funds. So Nicholas, you're the next one. You mentioned us that you have made more than 300 presentations with the same idea, but to different public. So tell us a little bit more about what kind of business case or what is the kind of presentation that actually had more success, and what would you recommend some of the other environmental trust funds to work on it?
Okay. I never counted them, but it sounds like 300. I mean, it will very much depend on the audience. As Brett just mentioned, it's what we call strategic communication. So even inside the same audience of impact investors, you can have very different different speech. Some are very much looking for impact first. Some others are more commercial. Some others don't understand anything about social environment. So you really have to adapt to it. For local partners, we are facing, yes, some serious communication also. When you speak to an NGO that has been his whole life used to receive grants and subsidies, to talk about something that you have to repay, even if there's no interest or something like this, just to a grant refundable, it's very different. And this is what I like from what we're doing. It's not because there's no one is making rich here. Everything is non-profit. So there's not really a commercial profit here, especially not for us. We're non-profit. We work under United Nations. But what is interesting from this approach of bringing this kind of refundable grant is the financial discipline. So we were in a world where MPAs, so let's say the MPAs under co-management that are managed by NGOs or managed by a group of communities, basically they were living on subsidies or from government subsidies. So it depends on the political agenda. As you and me know, most of these MPAs are totally underfunded. More than 80% worldwide have noticed that they have a serious lack of financing for basic personal and basic budget. So they were very much depending on some grant, and this is very much a piecemeal financing. Bringing on the board with the loan to make them financially sustainable is not only a solution to create revenues inside it, but it's also a discipline that we bring into a world that doesn't have before of really thinking of. So if we take a case, for example, in Dominican Republic or in Philippines, the first positions that have been recruited into the MPA have been the MPA manager, which classic background, scientific, environmental, and this. And the second one was a business developer or communication officer. So he was working already with the tourism sector. He was working already with all the different stakeholder partners around to create this partnership that can benefit the financial sustainability of the MPA. And this is new. And this is what we want for the future for some of these MPAs. You muted. Anton? Anton, you unmute? Oh, no, maybe not.
I'm sorry. These are some of the issues with the technology. So, no, I was mentioning that reaching out to the people is very important, and having also this kind of contact to explain to different audience the case. So Alberto, you have been working more than 30 years as a lawyer, and actually a lot of with companies. Tell us a little bit how this experience from your private work, and where you actually are looking at the best interests of the parties, can combine with the interest of Fondo Mexicano, that has a specialized role. No, so how to combine these interests?
You should not make that question. You need like a 2-hour conference to explain all the details, but let's try to share some experience that could help everybody. And I think that the world has changed a lot in the last 30-40 years, because we used to live like in silos, in different worlds. So you have the government doing things, then you have the social civil society trying to fix things, and then you have the private sector that was, you saw Shrek, it was far, far, far away in another kingdom. But suddenly, after 4 years, we are beginning to see that these are working more like an ecosystem. Now you cannot understand the private sector without the presence of the civil society, the NGOs, and you cannot understand the function of the human societies with these two in interrelation with the government. Not everybody is having at this moment the same level of responsibility, but the fact is that as the years came through, there is a more democratization on the uses of the resources and on the sharing of the projects. I think that the best part is when you have a project in which you could convince private sector players to be your partners. We are an eco-biological system in which everybody's sharing knowledge and everybody's sharing resources of all kinds. The number one resource that we want to grab from our partners is the brains of the people. When you see, for example, private sector entities, they have wonderful people, incredible people on their boards or incredible people on their managerial groups, teams. We try to grab that wisdom, that experience, and that knowledge on the benefit of the different projects where we try to canalize financial or other kind of resources. For me, that is the key, is the most important thing that happened in the last 4 years and is the road that will pave the future. Secondly, when I used to talk about the green topics or social topics on boards or committees or family offices 4 years ago, I was like weird. I was living in Mars or in Venus. Now it's a must. Especially, it's very emotional to me to see how the youngsters, the new generations, the ones who are coming on to take decisions, are very well aware of the importance of these activities and the importance also to invest on sustainable projects that, in addition to creating wealth, are protecting the planet. That didn't happen 4 years ago, and now you see the youngsters bringing these ideas to the table of their grandpas and their past. Is not only that we as a business or a family have to have a positive financial result, is that we as a family or as an entrepreneurial group have to be in these kind of projects, no matter what. So, as I said, now the evaluation of the opportunities are very different today than what happened in the past. And it's a great opportunity for us who seed these projects in the different funds we are seating, because we can create platforms where all these elements could gather and make a huge difference. On the back is the government. The government is always lacking energy, lacking interest, not very aware of what's going on, not even on their own offices. The governments move when they have the crisis, like here. I don't want to say that, but when the shit hits like here, they begin to smell. And then they are hopelessly looking for help. Okay, that's the world where we are. Let's continue on this road. So
Alberto,
that's what has changed a lot.
So Alberto, sorry to interrupt you. Actually, as you mentioned, 2 hours will be too few time to hear all the experiences. I really want to like to thank Brett, Nicolas, and Alberto for your time and for sharing your experience here in RedLAC. In RedLAC, we really are looking to new and innovative ways to bring people together to one main message. We need to take care of our planet. It's the only planet we have. And James, I hope we have finally reached the end of this session. Thank you so much to all of us, and please keep safe and keep in touch. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Anton, and thank you to all the speakers for your interventions. Just a quick reminder, there will be another session starting in just 20 minutes. Green Development Fund, building a regional financing platform for ecosystem restoration. That's in 20 minutes time, and that session will be in Spanish, but there will be live interpretation available also. So all of you are encouraged to join that. And of course, we have a full set of sessions tomorrow and Thursday also. So thank you all very much, and I hope to see you in 20 minutes time in the next session. Have a good time. Bye.